Today we want to really just discuss this idea of how to expand beyond the kind of typical music worship genre that's been impacting the globe now for 30, 40 years.
Wow.
Geraldine Latty is here with me today, and she's been a part of that in the UK, been a part of albums and key events over the last few decades, sorry to say.
Very true.
But you also bring this area of creativity, and it's, you can do the 4-chord rocked out songs. We did that a couple of weeks ago together. But also one of the things you and your husband carry is this idea of pushing beyond this homogeneous musical style. And I'd just love to hear a little bit of why first.
Right.
You know, why should we do that? 4 chords or 3, 2.5 work really well. Why should we kind of push beyond into other creative aspects?
I mean, I'd like to say that it came initially from I think we need to push beyond these boundaries. I'd like to say that, but I don't think it did. I think for me, as I reflect on it, my roots are Pentecostal.
Yeah.
My parents, West Indian Black Pentecostal church, so that's where I was till I was 11. So everything that came with that in terms of the spontaneity, the improvisation, the learning to improvise as a 3-year-old vocally is in my ear, and all of the exuberance and joy that came with that. We then went to a Methodist church, so in my ear for a number of years is all the hymnody of the great psalmists there. So hymns that I know off by heart now are from that period. Went to a Baptist church and experienced through that places like Spring Harvest and the 4 on the Floor, the rock thing. I'm a graduate musician, so I have all of the classical Bach, the Brandenburg concertos. I remember the first time I heard that, and it was like, this is amazing stuff. And so I guess through my musical experience, there is all of this stuff going on.
So in a sense, you weren't trying to really push the boundaries.
No.
You were being you.
Yeah.
Bringing who you have to worship. I mean, I think as some of my friends leading at different churches, and so much of it is production, and I value that. I love it. I need to learn that more and grow in that. But so much of it is they're bringing the 40 tracks that they downloaded and bought the week before, and they don't even listen to this music. A friend of ours, Mark Porter, has done some studies on churches that the musical tastes of the church do not reflect the CCM or Christian worship. And so I see there's a real disconnect with people trying to replicate or be a worship karaoke band or a Hillsong tribute band. But that's actually not who they are. They're not Hillsong. They're not Bethel. They're First Baptist Norfolk, Virginia, or First Assembly of God in Kansas City, Missouri. How can worship leaders and musicians begin to cultivate some of that? Being excellent, learning, but also cultivating their own sound.
I do think it takes courage, actually, and to hopefully not overstate it, but I think there is something that when you're in a particular context, and the current context, I guess, is the 4 on the Floor, the rock vibe. So I remember leading worship at national conferences, and there's a songbook that comes with that, and an expectation that you will do the songs from the songbook, which in the main are this 4 on the Floor rock thing, and to serve God as we serve the conference, and there are some great songs out there that are still rocking now that we use those songs, but it does take courage to then say, well, what about putting in a bit of crossover songs? So songs that maybe not in the hymn books, but are carrying significant gospel truth in the charts. What about putting that in the sung worship set? What about, rather than just sticking, as it was one of the songs we used to use, Over All the Earth, and then Graceland and Paul Simon came out. What about using the riff from Graceland and putting that with Over All the Earth? It does take courage when you perhaps get venue and conference managers coming and saying, we can't put that on our live album, so don't use it. but it does take courage to step into that, when you try and do a little bit of the jazz thing or a little bit of the funky thing, and people say, well, we're not quite sure if that's going to connect to those who pick up a CD and want the rock thing, tracks 1 to 13.
Yeah, the funny thing is so many of those people listen to all the music you've just... I don't know if this is a true statistic, but I heard years ago hip-hop in the U.S. is listened to white teenage middle-class girls like in high school. Again, I don't know if that's true, but it might not be the four on the floor is not their heart music.
Yes, that's key.
And so, and I guess the other thing that I think we've talked about before is, what if you're in a church that has amazing violinists and killer organists and also great 80s guitar players who can't quite try to replicate exact sound from Reading or the exact sound from Sydney or from London. Like, what can you do with those? Again,
that is the challenge. I mean, for me, I was involved in a church for over 20 years in a Baptist church, working with a music team such as that. So we had grade 8 trumpeters and rock guitarists who kind of had all the rock albums and stuff. And how do you encourage both musicians to feel a part, that they're actually contributing something to the sung worship and the gathered worship of the congregation? And so for us, and I know that Joel Payne at Resound has been thinking about this more intentionally and practically in terms of, the research says that actually most bands on Sundays would contain a flautist and maybe a pianist, and not the, 4 on the floor guitar full-on rock band. How do you deal with that when you have a trombonist or just 3 vocalists and a guitar at the back? So and I think it really is just starting from where you are. I mean, one of my massive encouragements to particularly people who play instrumental orchestral instruments is to be a flute. Don't try to be a guitar. So in the same way that I would say to the pianist in the band context, don't try and be an acoustic guitar. You've got the pianistic ability of however many keys to be a piano. And so the flute, don't try and be the right hand of the piano. Don't try even be a voice. Be a flute.
I hear a couple other things that I think that's so good about the musicians. I hear a couple other things in there too, or it comes to mind, is helping worship leaders to move beyond their own voice and their own instrument to think as arrangers.
Right, yeah, great.
And I think that's so challenging because so many of the worship leaders today aren't trained theologically or aren't trained musically or that only within one genre. But the reality is if the churches could invest in that, and again, I know we're all busy, but if God's put in your congregation these very talented musicians that aren't being used, the stewardship principle would say, this is who God's given you, so let's begin to invest in them, which might mean me learning how to arrange for organ and trombone and
for sure.
electric.
I hear of stories of people who, we haven't got a band, so we'll put on a CD and that will be our backing track. And I don't have much. I was going to say I don't have nothing. I don't have much against that. But my challenge to
I grew up in the 80s and 90s where we'd have backing track special music every week at church. So
for your congregation?
No. Just for special music. Do you remember
that? Yes, I don't mind that.
Do you?
I don't.
I can't handle it.
For the special
could you turn the tape back? Could you turn the tape back? The wrong key. It needs to
or wrong song.
It's gotten a little better. I hear you.
This is more for the general song,
congregational song and worship.
So my issue with that is so who said that a cappella wasn't a thing? Who said the voices in and of themselves? And so we have these churches with their voices, and they kind of there's an apology about, well, it's just my voice or it's just our voices, and I'm thinking, who made this a standard that suddenly, even if we have a congregation of 16 voices, that it has to sound somehow like a band, so let's put the backing track on. So I think there are so many questions about that. How do we encourage the instrumentalists we have, and how how serious are we? How much do we intend to encourage people from where they are? Are we prepared to check out resources? Are we prepared to learn ourselves how to even ask the flautist, well, what would you play if I wasn't, if we weren't trying to sound like, you know, a guitar band?
So I hear a couple things then. One, to be yourself.
Yeah,
Come to worship as yourself, not trying to always replicate and be someone else, but be who God's. And I've seen that in your own life, the journey from all these different traditions and styles. One, two is as a musician, don't try to be playing another part on another instrument again, unless it fits. But and for worship leaders to start to think as arrangers. The other one that I think you mentioned about resound was about songwriters too, as they write, to begin to reflect on, and as they kind of do some of their recordings, maybe some of these recordings can be stripped down. And I know Hillsong and Vineyard and others in some of the early days, you know, did their big produced album that was unbelievably excellent with all bells, all whistles, but then also sometimes would do an acoustic track or an acoustic video that was just guitar and voices. And so I think there's so many opportunities for that. If there was a worship leader looking for, you know, Sunday morning, we're a couple days from Sunday, what can I do on Sunday morning to kind of push creativity a little bit? We've got these 4 songs that we normally do at these tempos, and then the announcements come, and then the pastor preaches. We've got this very strict flow. What 1 or 2 things could you encourage them to try to do next week?
Yeah. Wow. My mind is going crazy.
1 or 2.
I think it is I think firstly it does take courage. It will take courage and brave people, women and men, that will want to go there with this. But say if you have a hymn, it's not thinking, right, let's get through the 4 verses. It's thinking, okay, verse 1, verse 2. Now, have you got an instrumentalist in your group that could perhaps do an instrumental link between verse 2 and verse 3? Even using that instrumental link while you read from, say it was Holy, 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 the hymn, and reading from Isaiah 6 while that flute was just playing, and you might say, well, my flautist doesn't improvise. We'll get them just to play the melody of the verse. So no singers, just that while you're reading that. That might be one way to do it.
Isaiah 6, Holy, 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 do a verse or 2 with an instrumental.
Yeah, an instrumental. Just finding ways to just stretch it out. You've got your 4 songs. Do you have to do those 4 songs? Why not do 3 songs and then use one of them to have an instrumental in the middle, or something that brings out the essence? I mean,
I've, like you, have visited churches all over the world, different sizes, house church. I think that idea literally could work in any tradition, any idea. So well done. That's awesome. Well, it's been cool to chat about you with this idea of creativity and music, and kind of expanding that. Your music highlights a lot of creativity in the way you write and the musical style, genres. Where can we find out about your music and get a hold of it?
Right. Okay, so if you go to GeraldineLatty.com, and that will take you to our shop at Loose Music, and you can check out CDs and writings there.
And a great Christmas album that came out just a few months ago for Christmas, and then also Can You See It, a solo project that pulls together some really epic genres.
Some kind of ethereal choir vocal stuff, even some experimental vocal stuff. So check that out.
Beautiful. Thanks, Geraldine, for what you do.
Thank you.